On May 8, 2026, the United States government did something it had refused to do for nearly 80 years. It opened the files. Photographs, cockpit footage, astronaut transcripts. Objects that don't move like anything we've ever built. The president himself went online and typed the words, "alien and extraterrestrial life." The headlines wrote themselves. The internet lost its mind. And that reaction, that distraction, may be exactly the point. Because while 100 million people stared up at blurry lights in the sky, something far more real and far more dangerous was already happening on the ground. Not in deep space, in a budget line, in a resignation letter, in a war that had already started, where, for the first time in human history, a machine helped decide who lived and who died. The UFOs aren't the story. This is. Let's start with what actually happened, because the real story is already strange enough without adding anything to it. On May 8th, the Department of War, that's what the Pentagon is officially called now, launched a website, war.gov/UFO/. The program has a name, Pursue, Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. And what they released was genuinely unprecedented. Reports dating back to 1944, photographs from military bases, video footage from naval aviators, witness accounts from astronauts on the Apollo missions, documents from agencies that, until now, wouldn't even confirm they had documents. The government said this was just the beginning. More files, they promised, would keep coming. Now, before we go further, let's be precise about one thing, because precision matters here. The United States government did not say aliens are real. What they said is that these phenomena are unresolved, unidentified, unexplained. That is still a massive statement. These are cases that the most powerful military intelligence apparatus in human history looked at and couldn't explain for decades, while officially pretending the files didn't exist. Among the newly released materials, a report from the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command documenting a football-shaped metallic object moving in ways that defied known aerodynamics, sighted near Japan. Unresolved, unidentified. And here's what I want you to hold in your mind as we go forward. The timing of this release was a choice. Someone decided now. Someone decided May 2026. The question is, why now? To answer that, you need to understand what else was happening in May 2026. Because a lot was happening. Quietly, without trending hashtags. 3 months earlier, on February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a military campaign against Iran. They called it Operation Epic Fury. Within the first 24 hours, not days, hours, the U.S. military struck over 1,000 targets. Let me put that in perspective. In the entire 43-day Gulf War of 1991, the U.S.-led coalition struck roughly 38,000 targets total. That's over 6 weeks. This time, 1,000 targets. 1 day. The speed was impossible by conventional military planning standards. Human analysts can't process that much intelligence that fast. Target selection used to take hours, sometimes days. So how? The answer to that question is the real story of 2026. And I'm not saying the UFO disclosure was deliberately engineered to pull your attention away from it. I want to be honest, I can't prove intent. What I can show you is what happened while you were looking at the sky. What decisions were being made? What money was being spent? What lines were being crossed? And which companies refused to cross them? And what happened to those companies when they said no? So let's go back to February 28th. Let's go back to Iran. And let's talk about what a machine did on that day that no machine had ever done before. The system has a name, Maven Smart System. It's a platform built to help military personnel process intelligence, satellite imagery, drone feeds, surveillance data, and prioritize targets. It integrates software from multiple technology companies, running constantly, ingesting more information than any human team could ever analyze. On the first day of Operation Epic Fury, Maven didn't just assist. According to reporting from the Washington Post, it was central to the entire targeting operation. The chief technology officer of Palantir, one of the companies behind Maven, made a statement that got very little coverage given how significant it was. He called it, quote, "the first large-scale combat operation driven by AI." The first. Think about what that means. For all of human history, the decision to strike a target, to end a life, required a human being to look at information and make a choice. Maybe a bad choice, maybe under pressure, but a human choice. In Iran, an algorithm sorted those choices at a speed and scale no human could match. The Pentagon confirmed that humans still made final targeting decisions. That's the official line. But at 1,000 targets in 24 hours, do the math, that's one target every 86 seconds, around the clock, non-stop. Is that meaningful human oversight? Serious researchers and international law experts are still debating that question. What isn't debated is the result. Strikes that hit hospitals. A school in the city of Minab where more than 170 people were killed, most of them children. The investigation into that strike is ongoing. But the technology that enabled the pace of that war, the technology that made striking 1,000 targets in a day even possible, that technology didn't appear overnight. It was built, funded, prioritized for years. And the budget tells you everything you need to know. Fiscal year 2026 was the first time in U.S. history that the Department of Defense created a separate budget line just for autonomy and AI systems. The number? $13.4 billion. That's not the Pentagon's entire AI budget. That's specifically for autonomous systems. Drones, unmanned vessels, self-directing ground vehicles, and the software, what officials called the central brain, that makes them operate together. $13.4 billion in 1 year. And then came the fiscal year 2027 proposal. The Defense Autonomous Warfare Group, the Pentagon's lead office for drone warfare, had a budget of $226 million in 2026. Their 2027 request? $54 billion. That is an increase of more than 24,000% in a single budget cycle. To put that in context, that's roughly the GDP of a mid-sized nation, allocated to one office for autonomous weapons in 1 year. This is not science fiction planning for some distant future conflict. Iran already happened. The field test is done. The results are being analyzed. And what the Pentagon learned from those results is apparently worth $54 billion. Now, here's where the story gets complicated. Because building weapons that operate with minimal human control requires one thing above everything else: artificial intelligence. Powerful, unrestricted AI. And not every AI company was willing to provide that. One of them said no. And what happened next, nobody in the mainstream news covered properly. The company is called Anthropic. They build an AI called Claude. Until late February 2026, Anthropic held an exclusive Pentagon contract worth up to $200 million. Their AI was being deployed across classified military networks. But the contract came with two conditions, two hard lines that Anthropic refused to negotiate away. First, Claude could not be used for mass surveillance of American citizens. Second, Claude could not be used to control fully autonomous weapons, weapons that could kill without meaningful human oversight. The Trump administration initially accepted those terms. Then came the Iran operation, and the Pentagon came back to Anthropic and pushed. According to multiple reports, the Department of Defense argued that military AI should be permitted for, quote, all lawful purposes, including autonomous weapons. They pushed Anthropic to loosen its restrictions. Anthropic refused. The Pentagon's response was to threaten to blacklist the company as a, and this is the actual term used, supply chain risk. Within hours of that threat becoming public, OpenAI stepped in. They announced they would fill the contract. And on February 9, 2026, 3 weeks before Operation Epic Fury began, Mrinank Sharma, the head of Anthropic's AI safeguards team, resigned. His resignation letter didn't mention Iran. It didn't mention the Pentagon. What it said was this: the world is in peril, and not just from AI or bioweapons, but from a whole series of interconnected crises unfolding in this very moment. He said he needed to leave to pursue work that aligned with his values. Then he moved back to the UK to write poetry. That's what a safety researcher at one of the most powerful AI companies on Earth chose to do in February 2026. Make of that what you will. So let me bring this back to where we started. On May 8th, the government opened the files, and the world looked up. Maybe the phenomena in those files are real. Maybe they're misidentified. Maybe someday we'll know. But while that question occupied the conversation, the budget was being signed. The contracts were being reassigned. The Autonomous Warfare Group was being handed $54 billion. And a safety researcher was packing his bags. I'm not telling you what to conclude. I'm showing you what happened and when. The question of whether that timing is a coincidence, that's yours to answer. What I can tell you is this: the decisions being made right now, in the next 2 to 3 years, will determine what kind of wars are fought for the next century. And most people are still looking at the sky. If you want to keep watching what's actually happening on the ground, you know what to do. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.